The Vickers machine gun or Vickers gun is a name primarily used to refer to the water-cooled .303 British, 7.7mm, machine gun produced by Vickers Limited, originally for the British Army. The machine gun typically required a 6 to 8 man team to operate, one fired, one fed the ammunition, the rest helped to carry the weapon, its ammunition, and spare parts. It was in service from before the First World War until the 1960s, with air-cooled versions of it on many Allied World War I fighter aircraft. The weapon had a reputation for great solidity and reliability. Ian V. Hogg, in Weapons and War Machines, describes an action that took place in August 1916, during which the British 100th Company of the Machine Gun Corps fired their 10 Vickers guns continuously for 12 hours. Using 100 barrels, they fired 1,000,000 rounds without a failure. It was this absolute foolproof reliability which endeared the Vickers to every British soldier who ever fired one. History. The Vickers machine gun was based on the successful Maxim gun of the late 19th century. After purchasing the Maxim company outright in 1896, Vickers took the design of the Maxim gun and improved it, inverting the mechanism as well as reducing its weight by lightening and simplifying the action and using high-strength alloys for certain components. A muzzle booster was also added. The British Army formally adopted the Vickers gun as its standard machine gun on November 26, 1912, using it alongside their Maxims. There were still great shortages when the First World War began, and the British Expeditionary Force was still equipped with Maxims when sent to France in 1914. Vickers was, in fact, threatened with prosecution for war profiteering, due to the exorbitant price it was demanding for each gun. As a result, the price was slashed. As the war progressed, and numbers increased, it became the British Army's primary machine gun, and served on all fronts during the conflict. When the Lewis gun was adopted as a light machine gun and issued to infantry units, the Vickers guns were redefined as heavy machine guns, withdrawn from infantry units, and grouped in the hands of the new Machine Gun Corps. When heavier 0.5 and /12.7 mm caliber machine guns appeared, the tripod-mounted, rifle-caliber machine guns like the Vickers became medium machine guns. After the First World War, the Machine Gun Corps, MGC, was disbanded and the Vickers returned to infantry units. Before the Second World War, there were plans to replace the Vickers gun. One of the contenders was the 7.92 mm, .312 in, Besa machine gun, a Czech design, which eventually became the British Army's standard tank-mounted machine gun. However, the Vickers remained in service with the British Army until March 30, 1968. Its last operational use was in the Radfan during the Aden emergency. Its successor in UK service is the L7G PMG. Use in aircraft. In 1913, a Vickers machine gun was mounted on the experimental Vickers E.F.B.1 biplane, which was probably the world's first purpose-built combat aeroplane. However, by the time the production version, the Vickers F.B.5, had entered service the following year, the armament had been changed to a Lewis gun. During World War I, the Vickers gun became a standard weapon on British and French military aircraft, especially after 1916. Although heavier than the Lewis, its closed bolt firing cycle made it much easier to synchronize to allow it to fire through aircraft propellers. The belt feed was enclosed right up to the gun's feedway to inhibit effects from wind. Steel disintegrating link ammunition belts were perfected in the UK by William de Courcy-Prideaux in mid-war and became standard for aircraft guns thereafter. The famous Sopwith Camel and the Spad 13 types used twin-synchronized Vickers, as did most British and French fighters between 1918 and the mid-1930s. In the air, the weighty water cooling system was rendered redundant by the chilly temperatures at high altitude and the constant stream of air passing over the gun as the plane flew, but because the weapon relied on barrel recoil, the empty, water-holding barrel jacket or casing needed to be retained. Several sets of louvered slots were cut into the barrel jacket to aid air cooling, a better solution than what had initially been attempted with the 1915 vintage LMG-08 German aircraft ordnance. As the machine gun armament of fighter aircraft moved from the fuselage to the wings in the years before the Second World War, the Vickers was generally replaced by the faster firing and more reliable Browning Model 1919 using metal-linked cartridges. The Gloucester Gladiator was the last RAF fighter to be armed with the Vickers, although they were later replaced by Brownings. The Fairey Swordfish continued to be fitted with the weapon until production ended in August 1944. Several British bombers and attack aircraft of the Second World War mounted the Vickers K machine gun or VGO, a completely different design, resembling the Lewis gun in external appearance. Vickers machine guns, designated as Models E, pilots, and F, observers, were also used among others in Poland, where 777 of them were converted to 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser cartridge in 1933 to 1937. Variants. The larger caliber, half-inch, version of the Vickers was used on armored fighting vehicles and naval vessels. The gun, machine, Vickers, .5-inch, Mk2 was used in tanks, the earlier Mark I having been the development model. This entered service in 1933 and was obsolete in 1944. Firing either single shot or automatic, it had a pistol-type trigger grip rather than the spades of the 0.303 in, 7.7 mm, cartridge. The gun, machine, Vickers, .5-inch, Mk3 was used as an anti-aircraft gun on British ships. This variation was typically 4 guns mounted on a 360 degrees rotating end, plus 80 degree to 10 degree, elevating housing. The belts were rolled into a spiral and placed in hoppers beside each gun. The heavy plain bullet weighed 1.3 ounces, 37 grams, and was good for 1,500 yd, 1,400 m, range. Maximum rate of fire for the Mark III was about 700 rpm from a 200-round belt carried in a drum. They were fitted from the 1920s onwards, but in practical terms, proved of little use. During the Second World War, the naval 0.5 in, 12.7 mm, version was also mounted on power-operated turrets in smaller watercraft, such as motor gun boats and motor torpedo boats. The Mark IV and V guns were improvements on the Mark II. Intended for British light tanks, some were used during the war on mounts on trucks by the Long-Range Desert Group in the North Africa Campaign. The Vickers machine gun was produced, between the wars, as the VZ.09 machine gun. Foreign service. The Vickers was widely sold commercially and saw service with many nations and their own particular ammunition. It was also modified for each country and served as a base for many other weapons. For example, 6.5 x 52 mm Mannlicher Carcano, 6.5 x 50 mm SR Arisaka, 6.5 x 53.5 mm R Dutch, 7 x 57 mm Mauser, 7.5 x 55 mm Swiss, 7.62 x 51 mm NATO. .3006 Springfield, 7.62 x 54 mm R, 7.65 x 53 mm Argentine, 8 mm Lebel, ZBVZ.09. Service after World War II. The Union of South Africa retained a large inventory of surplus Vickers machine guns after World War II. Many of these were donated to the National Liberation Front of Angola, FNLA, and National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, during the Angolan Civil War. Angolan militants were usually trained in their use by South African advisors. Small quantities rechambered for 7.62 mm NATO ammunition remained in active service with the South African Defence Force until the mid-1980s, when they were all relegated to reserve storage. 6 were withdrawn from storage and reused by a South African liaison team operating with UNITA during the Battle of Quitaque-Naval, after which the weapons were finally retired. The Vickers MG remains in service with the Indian, Pakistani, and Nepalese armed forces, as a reserve weapon, intended for emergency use in the event of a major conflict. Colt Vickers M1915. By the early 1900s, the U.S. military had a mixed collection of automatic machine guns in use that included M1895 potato diggers, 287 M1904 Maxims, 670 M1909 Bennett Mercy guns, and 353 Lewis machine guns. In 1913, the U.S. began to search for a superior automatic weapon. One of the weapons considered was the British Vickers machine gun. The Board of Ordnance and Fortifications held a meeting on March 15, 1913 to consider the adoption of a new type of machine gun. The board convened for the competitive test of automatic machine guns at Springfield Armory on September 15, 1913. 7 makes of automatic machine guns were considered and tried out. The Lewis gun during the endurance test had 206 jams and malfunctions, 35 broken parts, 15 parts not broken but requiring replacement as against respectively 23, 0, 0, for the Vickers gun and 59, 7, 0 for the automatic machine rifle .30, model of 1909, Bennett Mercy. The board is of the opinion that, with the exception of the Vickers gun, none of the other guns submitted showed sufficiently marked superiority for the military service, in comparison with the service automatic machine rifle to warrant further consideration of them in the field test. The board is of the unanimous opinion that the Vickers rifle caliber gun, light model, stood the most satisfactory test. As to the merits of the Vickers gun, there is no question it stood in a class by itself. Not a single part was broken nor replaced. Nor was there a jam worthy of the name during the entire series of tests. A better performance could not be desired. Captain John S. Butler, Office of the Chief of Ordnance. Field tests were conducted of the Vickers in 1914, and the gun was unanimously approved by the board for the Army under the designation Vickers machine gun model of 1915, caliber .30, water-cooled. 125 guns were ordered from Colt's Manufacturing Company in 1915, with an additional 4,000 ordered the next year, all chambered 4.3006. Design complexities, design modifications, and focus on producing previously ordered weapons meant that when the U.S. entered World War I in April 1917, Colt had not manufactured a single M1915. Production began in late 1917 with shipments to the Western Front in mid-1918. The first 12 divisions to reach France were given French Hotchkiss M1914 machine guns, and the next 10 had M1915s. The next 12 divisions were to have Browning M1917 machine guns, but there was a shortage of parts. By August 1918, 13 U.S. divisions were armed with the Colt Vickers machine gun. 7,653 guns were issued during the war out of 12,125 produced in total. War damage losses reduced the number of M1915s in the U.S. inventory to about 8,000 total. After World War I, the Colt Vickers machine guns were kept in reserve until World War II. Several hundred were sent to the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, and were all eventually lost to enemy action. 7,000 guns were sent to Britain under Lend-Lease to re-equip their forces after the Dunkirk evacuation, which depleted the weapon from the U.S. inventory before their entry into the war. Because the M1915 Colt Vickers was not chambered for the standard British .303, it was painted to differentiate it and relegated to Home Guard use. After the end of the war, the British had enough domestic Vickers guns to retire the M1915 from the Home Guard, after which they were disposed of. Specifications. The weight of the gun itself varied based on the gear attached, but was generally 25 to 30 pounds, 11 to 14 kilograms, with a 40 to 50 pound, 18 to 23 kilograms, tripod. The ammunition boxes for the 250-round ammunition belts weighed 22 pounds, 10.0 kilograms, each. In addition, it required about 7.5 imperial pints, 4.3 liters, of water in its evaporative cooling system to prevent overheating. The heat of the barrel boiled the water in the jacket surrounding it. The resulting steam was taken off by a flexible tube to a condenser container. This had the dual benefits of avoiding giving away the gun's location, and also enabling reuse of the water, which was very important in arid environments. In British service, the Vickers gun fired the standard .303-inch cartridges used in the Lee Enfield rifle, which generally had to be hand-loaded into the cloth ammunition belts. There was also a 0.5 in caliber version used as an anti-aircraft weapon and various other calibers produced for foreign buyers. The gun was 3 feet 8 inches, 112 centimeters, long, and its cyclic rate of fire was between 450 and 600 rounds per minute. In practice, it was expected that 10,000 rounds would be fired per hour, and that the barrel would be changed every hour, a 2-minute job for a trained team. The Vickers gun could sustain fire for long durations of time exceeding the recommended 10,000 rounds an hour due to the water-cooled barrel and hourly barrel swaps. One account states a Vickers fired just under 5 million rounds in a week as a test in 1963 at Strensel Barracks and was still operable. The Mark 8 cartridge, which had a boat-tailed bullet, could be used against targets at a range of approximately 4,500 yards, 4,100 m. The muzzle velocity for Vickers rounds were generally 2,440 plus or minus 40 feet per second with a 150 to 175 grain bullet. The shell was generally made of an alloy of cupronickel and gilding metal. Ammunition for the Vickers used color-coded annuli. Tracer ammunition was marked with a red annulus, armoring-piercing ammunition a green annulus, and incendiary ammunition was marked with a blue annulus. Lastly, explosive ammunition was marked with an orange annulus before the Second World War and was changed to black. Use. The gun and its tripod were carried separately and both were heavy. The Vickers MKI was 30 pounds, 13.6 kilograms, without the water and tripod, and weighed 40 pounds, 18.1 kilograms, with the water. The original design did not anticipate it being carried up jungle-covered mountains on men's backs, but such was the weapon's popularity that men were generally content to pack it to all manner of difficult locations. The tripod would be set up to make a firm base, often dug into the ground a little and perhaps with the feet weighted down with sandbags. The water jacket would be filled with about 4 liters of water from a small hole at the rear end, sealed by a cap. The evaporative cooling system, though heavy, was very effective and enabled the gun to keep firing far longer than its air-cooled rival weapons. If water was unavailable, soldiers were known to resort to using their urine. It was sometimes claimed that crews would fire off a few rounds simply to heat their guns cooling water to make tea, despite the resulting brew tasting of machine oil. The loader sat to the gunner's right, and fed in belts of cloth, into which the rounds had been placed. The weapon would draw in the belt from right to left, pull the next round out of the belt and into the chamber, fire it, then send the fired brass cartridge down and out of the receiver while the cloth belt would continue out the left side. During sustained fire, the barrel would heat up, which heated the water in the jacket until hot enough for the water to evaporate or boil, thereby cooling the barrel, releasing the heat through steam. It took the MKI 600 rounds of continuous fire to boil the water in the jacket, evaporating at a rate of 1.5 pints, 0.852 L, per 1,000 rounds. The steam would reach the top of the jacket and enter a steam tube which led to a port that was situated under the jacket near the muzzle. A hose was connected to this, which released the steam into a metal water can, allowing it to be vented away from the rest of the gun, hiding the steam cloud and the gun's position. This also allowed any condensate to be reclaimed from the steam. Before the can got too full, it would be emptied back into the jacket to replenish the water level, which would have fallen as the water evaporated and boiled away. If the water jacket needed to be emptied, a plug under the jacket could be unscrewed to drain the entire jacket. The Vickers was used for indirect fire against enemy positions at ranges up to 4,500 yards, 4,100 m. This plunging fire was used to great effect against road junctions, trench systems, forming up points, and other locations that might be observed by a forward observer, or zeroed in at one time for future attacks, or guessed at by men using maps and experience. Sometimes a location might be zeroed in during the day, and then attacked at night, much to the surprise and confusion of the enemy. New Zealand units were especially fond of this use. A white disc would be set up on a pole near the MMG, and the gunner would aim at a mark on it, knowing that this corresponded to aiming at the distant target. There was a special backsight with a tall extension on it for this purpose. The only similar weapon of the time to use indirect fire was the German MG-08, which had a separate attachment sight with range calculator. A British, World War II, Vickers medium machine gun platoon typically had one officer in command of 4 guns, in 2 sections of 2, each with a crew and a small team of riflemen whose job was to protect the gun and keep it supplied with ammunition. Users: Albania, Australia, Belgium used in aircraft, Bolivia used during the Chaco War, Canada, Ceylon, China, Czechoslovakia, used 4 locally produced Mk-30s, modified Vickers guns, on the Avia B534. Egypt, France French Air Service, SPAD 7 and 13, during WWI. Finland, India, Indonesia used during the Indonesian National Revolution. Ireland, Italy chambered in 6.5 times 52 mm Carcano for infantry and .303 British for aircraft. Luxembourg, Malaya, Mexico, Nepal, Netherlands, New Zealand, Dominion of Newfoundland, Pakistan, Paraguay used during the Chaco War. Philippines, Portugal produced locally in 1929. Romania, Rhodesia, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Southern Rhodesia, Thailand, Tonga, United Kingdom. United States issued to the 1st U.S. divisions sent to France in World War I due to the lack of American machine guns.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.